Holy and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our sight be acceptable to you. Amen. This morning, I'm bringing some people along on my journey. And one of them is the man, his name is Wayne Brower, and he gave me ideas for this sermon and helped me to shape it. As he preached on, life is a journey, it's not a destination. And it's not a tour either. So on this journey this morning, I thought, well, okay, Jesus is with us, Peter's with us, the disciples are with us. So I thought I'd add some other people such as C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, Fosdick, Soren Kierkegaard. All of them make little tiny appearances in this sermon this morning or in this story. Life is a journey and not a destination. And one, I think, and if you've read Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, that many people don't want to travel the journey. It's frightening to not know where you're going. And we can all be reluctant travelers. And have you ever experienced being mistaken for someone else in your life? Someone walking up to you and saying, hey, how are you? Many years ago, and too many to count, actually about 30 years ago, when I was in my 30s and very thin, I was in a grocery store in Buffalo, New York with my children. And a young woman came running up to me. She goes, are you Martina Navratilova? And I thought to myself, not in Buffalo, New York. And I may have blushed, and I said, no, I'm not. And then she asked me if I was her cousin. Mistaken identity. And as I said, maybe you've been mistaken for someone else, someone who looked similar. When Queen Elizabeth was alive, she was often mistaken as someone who looked similar to the Queen. On one occasion, she was stopped in Norfolk as she entered a tea shop, and two women were exiting, and they were carrying baskets of cakes and breads. And one commented to the Queen that she looked remarkably similar to Queen Elizabeth. And Queen Elizabeth responded, how very reassuring, and she moved on. I think we expect people to be in certain places and not in other places. If you've seen someone you never saw outside churches, you don't quite recognize them. At least I find that for myself. Mistaken identities do happen. They happen often. And in last week's gospel in Matthew, it was certainly true. Just before the verses I read this morning and Andy preached on last week, Jesus asked his disciples what people were saying about him. And they gave him different answers. Some say Elijah, some say John the Baptist, some say a prophet. But Jesus, as we know, didn't drop it at there. He didn't want to know what others were saying, really. Well, he was curious. And then he asked, really pops the big question, who do you say I am? Peter, in his impulsive way, blurted out the answer, you're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. Peter got it right. Jesus praised him then and there. Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And Peter will be given the keys to heaven. And then Jesus sternly ordered them not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. And later in Matthew, in chapter 18, all the disciples receive the same authority as Peter. Peter saw Jesus as a Messiah who was going to come and conquer Rome and restore Israel. And after last week's reading, Peter is the shining star, a celebrity of sorts. He gave the right answer, and I can imagine the disciples slapping him on the back. Good job, Peter, you got it. You answered correctly and you won the prize. The keys, you got them. Say a few words, Peter. Relish in your moments of stardom. Jesus is the Messiah, the person who will restore Israel. And Peter's confession was euphoric for the group. Do you remember telling someone that you loved them? Or doing a job that you were just so excited about? And how that moment changed everything? Because at first you weren't certain that you wanted to tell someone that you love them because how they might respond in a positive or negative way. But you blurted it out. And then you both silently looked at one another. And time stood still. Oh, that moment. Make this moment last. Freeze it. Jesus, Peter was saying, you are the Messiah. You're the Son of God, and we love you. And we all lived happily ever after. However, what does that mean in this morning's gospel? It takes a huge turn. This morning's gospel, we learn what it means, and its implications aren't only for Jesus, but the disciples as well, and also for us. Jesus tells them that he's going to Jerusalem, that his enemies are waiting for him. And he tells them that they're going to arrest him and beat him and make him suffer, and the outcome will be his death. Well, that's weird, Peter probably thought. How did we just go from triumph and invincibility to defeat and disaster? Something didn't add up. So Peter, being the leader of the 12, pulls Jesus aside so as not to embarrass him in front of the others, to talk to him about what he just told them. And Peter asks him, what are you talking about? You're frightening us. This must never happen. The disciples were in shock, naturally so, and Peter was taken aback, because then Jesus broke that silence and he spoke to them about what was ahead of him and for them also. He told them plainly what would happen to them as his followers. To be a follower of Jesus was to take up the cross and follow him. And he says, for those who want to save their life, they will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? And I think Jesus said this in an angry tone. After all, the week before, Peter said, you're the Messiah. Maybe Jesus thought, 3 years, it's paid off. They know who I am. Well, yes. They don't fully know who he is yet. And he might have been a little annoyed at them. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? And what will they give in return? And Jesus spoke about the paradoxical meaning of life. The euphoria earlier on when Peter acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah was gone. The moment was gone. And Jesus is telling them that life isn't found in just that moment. Though there are moments of insight and love and knowledge, and it's easy, and I've done it, and tempting to try and make that special moment last, where you don't want to change it, you just want to sit there. I was on a pilgrimage once to Israel, and we had an Israeli Anglican Arab priest, and he would tell us at the outstart of the journey, he said, put your cameras down. He said, you're on a pilgrimage. He said, use your eyes. Take pictures with your eyes. You'll see more. And to this day, I still do that when I go places. I actually blink my eyes like a camera when I'm going. But I do. So they're all back there somewhere in the file. And Jesus is telling them that there's so much more. That life is a journey, it's not a destination. Things will change, and it won't be and they won't be able to go back to the good old days, relive the past when everything was right and good and true. We know the story. Peter and the disciples were living it. They did not know what was going to happen. And I was thinking, St. Francis, you're on a journey. Isn't that wonderful? Sort of. A transition. Discerning along with those who submit their names to be your new rector. How exciting and how scary to be in the midst of uncertainty. And yet, it's a journey that you must take, and the other people will be taking, and you don't take it alone. And to add to the disciples' discomfort, he tells them that on this journey, if anyone would come after him, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. The cross can be a blessing and the cross can be a curse, life and death, suffering and joy. When I was growing up, I believed that the cross was something awful in life, and I was told that you had to bear your cross. You couldn't change it. It was yours. God gave it to you. You would suffer your entire life. Blah, blah, blah. Live with it. There's no going back and no going forward. And I thought, why would I want to follow that God? And it was through the help and encouragement of being in community in different churches that I discovered that to follow Christ is to live life. And yes, it's also to suffer. But other people help us carry that cross. I read a few days ago someone writing about following Christ. And this person said that following Christ enables us to see the suffering in other people's lives. Now hold on to that, because none of us like to suffer. But does that ring true to you? That somehow Christ has opened a door for you to give you a certain sense of other people's suffering and to want to help them. Jesus helps us to see the suffering of other people, and I'm sure the disciples at the time didn't understand it. He helps them to see the sorrow, the pain, injustice, oppression, or torment inflicted in life. They saw that, the disciples, with their eyes, Jesus touching people's lives. He came into the world to alleviate the suffering of others, to show people love and compassion. All very scary, I think, too. To enter into someone's suffering, that's a big deal. But does it help to know that Jesus is with you when we enter into someone else's suffering, and even our own? And I often think I have a mug that says, I'm safe here, this is my own little world. And so wouldn't it be easier to do that, to hunker down and be safe in our own worlds, to never leave the church, never leave our houses? But it can't happen. And when that does happen, when people hunker down, and we're living in such a culture of fear, that people are hunkering down all over the place and not seeing other people. It's all about me. It's all about the leadership. It's all about what I want. And people are more oppressed and frightened and stressed. Soren Kierkegaard put it straight when he wrote that if we are really honest, we experience when we read Jesus' words. Follow me, he calls. And Kierkegaard says, but where? And how? And in what way and for how long? Kierkegaard said that we should really collect up all our New Testaments and then bring them out to an open place high on some mountaintop. And there we'll pile them up high and kneel on them to pray and say, God, take this book back again. We can't handle it. It frightens us. And Jesus, go to some other people and leave us alone. Still, Jesus stands next to us, sandals on his feet, and says, time to go. Pick it up, whatever concerns you, and follow me. After all, Joseph of Arimathea helped Jesus carry his cross. Continue on this journey of life. It's going to be messy, and it's not going to be what you expected, but I'm with you. Wayne Brover says that the journey of life is a personal journey. C.S. Lewis says the same thing. That we truly can't know someone else's story. We can hear their story, and that story can help us in our lives. No one can stand in for us. Jesus did that already. And part of the journey is a pilgrimage. And on a pilgrimage, it's a journey where we learn about ourselves, aspects of our relationship with God. And pilgrimages are personal and something you do have to do yourself. And on those pilgrimages, which is part of the journey, we meet other people who help us. They're part of it. Bauer and other people say, as does Jesus, that religion is not a spectator sport. And I love that. I always thought it was a spectator sport. Go to church, receive communion, go. That was it. Religion is a verb, it's action. It calls us to something. Harry Emerson Fosdick remembered a storm off the Atlantic coast, and a ship foundered on the rocks at the Atlantic, floundered on the rocks, and the Coast Guard was called out. The captain ordered the lifeboat to be launched, but one of the crew protested. "Sir," he said in fear, "the wind is offshore and the tide is running out. We can launch the boat, but we'll never get back." The captain looked at him with a father's eyes and then said, "Launch the boat, men. We have to go out. That's our duty, but we don't have to come back." So Jesus tells us some very strange things here. The one who wants to protect himself, the one who wants to hide herself, the one who wishes to guard themselves carefully will never find the meaning of life. And it doesn't mean we go out there and do great big things, driving boats into storms. But maybe it's a thing that's happening in your life that you're called to do. We're all called to something different. I love C.S. Lewis, and I love the story of the Lord of the Rings, and last week I stayed up late to watch the Lord of the Rings again for probably the fourth time, but was able to pick out certain things. And if you know the story that Bilbo Baggins gives the ring to Frodo, and he starts this long journey to Mordor to get rid of the ring, to destroy it because it has such power, and he has all of these people with him, Strider and Bilbo and Sam Tuke and everyone. Well, it comes a point in the story when they're running through, after they see the orcs are chasing them, and Mordor is in the distance, and as you can see it flaming, and Frodo takes off. He runs. They tell him, "Run, get out of here now, do whatever you need to do." So Frodo runs by himself to the shore, and he finds a boat. He gets into the boat. He looks very sad, and he's out almost in the middle of the water, and here comes his friend Samwise. And Sam's standing on the shore and saying, I need to go with you. I promised Gandalf. I promised all these people I would keep you safe. And Frodo yells, "You can't go where I'm going. You can't suffer what I'm going to suffer." And Sam doesn't listen to me. He runs into the water, and he goes up to the boat, and he grabs onto it, and he says, "I need to go with you." And Frodo says, "You can't. This journey is my journey, and what I'm going to experience is what I experience of my own. And I don't want you to be hurt," essentially is what he's saying. And Sam says, "I made a promise to you, and I know this is not my journey, but I want to go with you." And I love that. Because sometimes we find ourselves in situations like that. Or if you've had cancer, or had someone pass away, it's not a journey we all want to go on. It's a journey that we do go on, and hopefully with others. So that's the end of the story for us. Peter's great confession that Jesus is the Messiah. Peter's great denial. Jesus turning them into a great grace, the denial. Life is a journey, he tells us, not a destination. We're not meant to hide ourselves or stand or sit in one place, at least for not very long. Life isn't happily ever after, but it is fulfilling. Jesus tells us that life is a pilgrimage, not a tour, whereby someone plans our agenda. We've all been on tours. You're on someone else's time. Jesus is reminding us that life is lived by following the footsteps of Jesus in the mission of the church, in the road less traveled, and one we need to walk in order to find who we are in Christ. So what does this mean for you? I don't know. We can't know for each other. We can share, we can help, we can support. But I know one thing, is that we never, ever walk this earth alone. Amen.